attention. I mean, just the scene of Melania Trump coming out last week and trying to sell this AI teacher, right? I think is really the dystopic future that we might be looking at, right? And of course, we are being told this is inevitable. This, AI is already in the classroom, which it is, and we just have to kind of use it ethically. And so we're here to really speak back to that narrative and to have a couple of voices that I, learned so much from in putting together this special section around AI in schools. And I'm really excited to have them all here so we can think together about how we can teach and organize for human-centered learning, not a dystopic robot-centered future. And I also, just before we jump into it, want to send a huge thank you to our ASL interpreters, Ariel Pearson and Ella Fagioni. Please join me in welcoming our panelists who are here. Ann Lutz Fernandez, who is a former English teacher and co-author of Schooled, Ordinary, Extraordinary Teaching in an Age of Change. Rachel Franz, the Young Children Thrive Offline Program Director at Fair Play. If you don't know about Fair Play, you've got to follow them, what they're doing. Really important independent nonprofit working to enhance children's well-being by eliminating the exploitative and harmful business practices of marketers and big tech. And Jessie Agopian, who is a fellow Rethinking Schools editor, Zinn Education Project campaign director, and the author of several books, but the most recent, Teach Truth, The Struggle for Anti-Racist Education. All right, so we're going to jump into it. And before I start asking questions, I just want to let folks know that we're hoping to have time after this conversation for your questions as well. So there is in Zoom, if you're joining us through the computer, there is a Q&A box. If you click the little more box, there's a Q&A box. And if you have questions that you brought or that come up for you while you're listening to the panelists, please feel free to throw a question in the Q&A box. If you're joining by phone, I don't think you have that. So if you want to ask a question, just put it in like all caps in the chat so I can see it clearly as a question. All right. So let's just jump into it and start a general question for all of you. What are your biggest concerns regarding the explosion of AI more generally and in schools specifically? Why don't we start with Jessie?
All right, thank you, Adam. I'm so glad that we're beginning to grapple with this question about the use of AI instead of just succumbing to the inevitability argument, right? And so it's vital that educators and parents and students have these discussions and not succumb to the tech industry and the billionaires and this government that is hell-bent on inserting AI into our schools. And you may have seen that Secretary of Education Linda McMahon last April stood on stage at a major ed tech conference, and she promised that students across the country would soon be benefiting from A1 learning. And she kept saying it over and over again, A1, A1, instead of AI. She clearly didn't really know what she was talking about. She said A1 had to be brought to pre-K classrooms. And the clip went viral, right? Late night hosts had fun roasting her. A1 Steak Sauce even joked that yes, all schools should have access to A1. And it was funny for a minute until you think about how revealing it is about their plans, right? Because behind that gaffe is the plan to flood schools with AI and present it as the cure for everything from what they call learning loss to teacher burnout and everything else. And you hear the same thing from billionaires like Bill Gates, who recently said AI will soon be as good as any tutor any human ever could, and that teachers and doctors would be replaced by AI in the near future, right? And so we're being sold a future where the emotional and intellectual work of teaching gets replaced by systems designed for content delivery, for data extraction, for surveillance. And I think, that's the thing that concerns me the most, really. I guess I would break it down into three major areas. First, we need to be clear about what this technology actually is, because what we're calling AI actually is not intelligent. It doesn't think, right? It mimics. And, I think we need to understand it as algorithmic mimicry better than intelligence. And then secondly, I think AI fundamentally misunderstands how learning works, right? Educators have known for a very long time, uh, you know, childhood psychologists and development specialists know that learning is social. This is something the great psychologist Lev Vygotsky really detailed, right? So learning happens through relationships. It happens through dialogues. It happens through teachers recognizing confusion, teachers recognizing curiosity, teachers recognizing trauma of our kids. AI can't see a student's hesitation, right? It can't recognize the brilliance in an unfinished idea. It can't recognize when this kid is homeless and connect them with services. So when we bring AI in as a teacher, we're actually stripping away the conditions that make learning possible, because learning is a social activity that has to take place between human beings. And then lastly, I think I'm concerned that AI is being used to really address the wrong problems, right? Teachers are overwhelmed right now, right? Class sizes are too big. Students need more support. But instead of investing in people, instead of investing in counselors and librarians and smaller class sizes, instead of investing in instructional assistants or IAs, we're investing in AI. We have it backwards, right? So we can't make AI a substitute for a political problem, which is chronic underfunding of education. So, I think that tied to this is something even more troubling: the rise of surveillance, the using of AI to monitor what students write, what they search, what they say, often outside of school hours even. And that changes how young people behave, and students start censoring themselves in spaces that were supposed to be about encouraging risk taking. That's the other thing about learning. It can't occur if you don't have space for curiosity, creativity, and risk taking. And studies have shown how that is impacted by the mass surveillance of AI. So for me, the biggest concern isn't just the technology itself, but it's really a vision of education that thinks we can eliminate the human element.
Thank you, Jesse. Rachel, let's go to you next. What are your biggest concerns with AI in
Yeah.
schools?
Well, plus 1,000 to everything Jesse just said. I think, we're seeing AI show up across the developmental spectrum, right? We're seeing AI marketed to children as young as infants, and with no real consideration for the developmental needs mouth not working yet, of children of all different abilities and identities, and it's a huge problem. And as practitioners, a former practitioner myself, we know that we support children best with evidence-based, developmentally enriching, social and culturally responsive pedagogy. And almost all of this AI has been released before that evidence base has been established. So before any independent research could be conducted, we are bombarding children with this experiment. It means that the potential benefits are a guess at best, and the harms could be unprecedented. In the US, AI is largely unregulated as well. So there are no checks and balances in terms of what AI can do. And without regulation, we've seen with other tech companies that they can put so many practices in place that ultimately harm young people and adults alike. AI, over the past 10 years, it's become increasingly clear that AI has a strong history of bias. Jesse mentioned that sort of mimicry, right? But there's a lot of different types of ways that bias shows up in the way that AI delivers information. I was testing an AI toy recently and asked it to tell me more about Black boys, and it said, we can't discuss that topic. Let's talk about something fun, right? And these are products that are designed for very young children. And so there's so much experimentation that's being done, and our students are the guinea pigs, and often without the consent of their primary caregivers. I'd also echo Jesse's concerns around surveillance. AI can collect data like many technologies before never have been able to do. And already with EdTech, there was a report a few years ago that showed that 96% of EdTech apps share personal information with third parties, so that children can be marketed to, tracked, generally surveilled. And with AI that can collect data, biometric data, and all different types of terrifying surveillance, right? We can only imagine the potential consequences. And then, at Fair Play, we do a lot of work to look at how corporations themselves interfere in child well-being. And AI is a tech industry, right? This is big tech. And, the tech industry marketing and lobbying encourages schools to use products incorporating AI, despite the fact that so many of these companies, they have terms of use and disclaimers that state that their technology is not suitable for children. We know this is going to be a multi-billion-dollar industry in the next 10 years. It's expected to explode. And so the questions for me is, why are we allowing these companies to profit off of children at the expense of their well-being?
Anne, how about you? What are some of your major concerns you want to add
Well,
here?
that's not enough, right? I mean, if everything that Jesse and Rachel talked about, I mean, there are so many reasons, and that's why, it's really hard for me to narrow the field of concerns to one overriding concern. And they didn't, even mention some of the environmental and health concerns, because there's just so many, right? There's political, there's social, there's economic, there's health and environmental concerns. But for me, if I have to boil it down to one reason why this topic has me so fired up, is that I believe that having teachers and students rush into using generative AI in particular is is antithetical to what I see as the overarching purpose of education, the creation of lifelong learners. I mean, some of the things that Jesse mentioned play into that. Some of the things that Rachel mentioned play into that, and some of what we'll talk later play into that. But if that is our overarching goal, is to create lifelong learners, then this is not the way to get there. And for me, that's the umbrella concern that you can hang, and unfortunately can hang probably a dozen significant, serious concerns off of.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all. I wanna go back to Rachel for a little bit more because I think in your article you really flesh out some of the specific concerns and problems that are related to young children. I think often as a high school teacher, I'm very much, and even some of the questions that we've gotten in the Q&A are very high school focused when you're thinking about AI. But as you said, this is something that is affecting very young children, right? And a lot of them already.
Yeah, it's unsurprising that, AI is targeting young children because when you target children early and often, you get brand loyalty. In early childhood, children's brains are being wired for the first time, and how they spend their time shapes their understanding of how the world works, their skills, their sense of self, their relationships with others. And we know that especially young children, they need hands-on, sensory-filled play and social interactions with supportive adults and peers. And over time, because there is a lot of profit to be made with young children and technology, there's been this myth that has grown that says that children need to use technology early and often in order to be successful in today's world. And we're seeing that already with AI, with calls for AI literacy for toddlers. And it has become interpreted into this idea that we need to bring AI into childcare programs and preschools and that sort of thing. The problem is that children need to develop so many skills offline before their brains and their bodies are ready for technology, kind of full stop. And let alone, right, AI is sort of this amorphous thing that even we as adults don't understand. The majority of adults can't identify when like a video or a written response is AI. It's extremely confusing and can add to it can kind of overwhelm children's cognitive load, making it very difficult for them to process information. So we're seeing it in a number of different forms in early childhood. In my article, we focused a lot on AI toys, which are chatbots they're chatbots embedded in your everyday stuffed animal or a cute toy robot. And it's the same technology that's being used in chatbot technology that is encouraging teens to commit acts of violence, impacting their mental health, encouraging suicide, etc., just in a cute, cuddly package. And the toys collect a ton of data. They manipulate children into spending time with them. And what's the creepiest about it is that, and Jesse touched on this earlier, is that they are marketed as companions, as friends, as replacements for humans. Now, for a family, right, they want the absolute best for their child, right? It's something that we know that the majority of families, like, they just want what's best for their child. They want them to be well and successful in the world. And this kind of marketing takes advantage of that. And it's super powerful, right? The big tech marketing machine is huge and very hard to right, to go up against. And what we get is this these toys and products that build trust with children and can ultimately impact their sense of trust, their understanding of the world, their relationships and trust with caring adults and peers, and their creativity and imagination. Another issue that we've seen that's really acutely impacting young children is the proliferation of AI generated content on platforms like YouTube. This is coming into the classroom because there are many early childhood centers that use YouTube regularly, have it on, allow children to kind of access it freely. And a lot of it is happening at home. 72% of families with children under 6 use YouTube daily. And we are seeing all of this AI slop, which is low quality, mass produced video content that is designed to kind of mesmerize children into spending more time on the platform and making the creators more money. And I'll talk a little bit more later about a campaign we have going on around that. But, you know, these are disguised as nursery rhymes and, you know, cute learning videos, but they are actually, they're actually just sort of zombifying videos that don't support children's learning or well-being. And we have creators bragging that they make millions off of making these AI videos that hook kids' attention. And then lastly, I'll just briefly touch on this, but we've, in attending recent early childhood conferences and that sort of thing, we're seeing a call for more and more generative AI use in the classroom with children as young as 3. And there is a big push to bring, you know, like story creation or video creation or song creation AI directly to children, and there's a celebration of that. And we see that like the AI companies are showing up in these spaces to really kind of market themselves and take advantage of this myth that children need technology early and often, and that that AI literacy in early childhood looks like bringing AI to them, which it absolutely should not.
Yeah. Rachel, thank you so much. And you know, I just wanted to read because this quote you had in your article from the Senate Committee on Judiciary, the Judiciary hearing on AI chatbots, it's from this doctor from the American Psychological Association, but that 1/4 of all young children are already using AI in learning and play. I found that so shocking. And it speaks to what you said earlier around this, you know, just massive experiment that our children are the guinea pigs in. But I want to transition now to Anne, because Anne's article I found, if you haven't read it yet, it's so helpful because it goes through a lot of kind of the arguments that we get against for AI, why we should have AI in schools, and speaks back to those. And we've gotten, you know, some questions in the chat, in the question and answer around this. And so I want to go through a couple of these and have you, Anne, respond, but also Jesse, Rachel, if you feel like you want to respond to these too. I mean, I think it's important for us all to think about how do we respond to some of these. So one thing, you know, I've heard, and I saw, let me go back to one of the questions I saw, right? So there's this idea that, okay, we understand the critiques of AI, but, you know, we're told, right, that it's inevitable, that it's already here. It's the future of education. You know, the best we can do is kind of teach our students to use it ethically. And then there's this other argument, you know, that someone put in the Q&A that I thought also is worth responding to here, of this idea that Okay, well, the economy is being driven by AI, right? Like we need students to know AI, and especially in like a computer science class is what the question is, right? To be trained for the job market. Is there a place for AI training in schools because we need to train them for the job market? And then should we be teaching students to use AI ethically? How would you respond to those?
Oh boy. Well, on the inevitability argument, I like to joke that death is inevitable, but I'm not in a hurry for that either. But to get serious, let's just back up for a moment to 10, 15 years ago when many teachers were told that there was nothing we could do about cell phones in the classroom, that kids were going to use them, and we needed to teach students how to use them responsibly. A lot of schools didn't have policies, and teachers were left to try to figure that out by themselves. Then the rollout of one-to-one devices, Chromebooks, iPads for all, and we were told then children are digital natives and they're already using these devices and their futures are in a digital work world, and we need to prepare them for that by having them use them from kindergarten on, or from very young grades on, and in school. And we stand here today with school after school, district after district banning cell phones and questioning the reliance on devices and the amount of screen time being spent in schools. And this is as the research has come in to show harms that, quite frankly, we could have anticipated, and little evidence about learning gains for much of the time and money and energy that was expended by school districts for much of the hardware and software that has been sold to them. And now we have, once again, tech companies pressuring politicians and government officials and admins and parents and teachers to embrace really, what we could see is just another new range of new tech tools. And again, sometimes for free, that they will later have to pay for, that, once again, we don't have, as has been mentioned already, that we don't have meaningful evidence at this point to support their usefulness in improving teaching and learning. So to me, it's fairly astounding that we haven't learned those lessons. And I think it really bears reminding when people bring that inevitability argument to bear, that we are just kind of waking up to the inevitability arguments that were applied to earlier ed tech. And with respect to the future of education, again, I don't think without research to support its usefulness, we can say that it's the future of education. And even the corporations, if we talk about the future of work, even the corporations who say they're saying we want students and workers trained on AI tools, but even they don't know whether, a lot of them don't know whether those tools are going to be effective for them. A lot of companies have reported that they haven't made a return on their investment in AI yet. Some of them say they don't know what the future of work looks like. Even Bill Gates has said he doesn't know what the future of work looks like under AI. But we teachers and administrators are expected to know what educating them for that work looks like. There's a wonderful person to follow on Blue Sky, which is where I primarily am, named Tom Mullaney, and he has a great blog, and he's an ed tech person who is really encouraging slowing down on the AI mania. And he said, why are we expecting teachers to be fortune tellers, to forecast the future of what work looks like, which is really what we're being asked to do. We're being asked to take for granted that it looks like training kids on ChatGPT or training kids on generative AI. And it may be the future of computer science classes and the future of some university classes and subjects or fields that require huge data sets to be processed to learn AI tools and AI skills. But we know, I think we should know that the future of K-12 should be teaching foundational skills, like teaching students how to read, teaching them how to write, how to think, how to analyze, how to discuss, how to present, how to research, how to do math, how to conduct experiments, how to persevere, to collaborate, to lead. These are the skills that have been shown in the research of the past couple of years to have been degraded by the use of generative AI. And that I think is our primary mission. And so to kind of circle back to my initial point, I really do think it's antithetical to what our purpose is. And I don't know if you want me to get started on the teach them how to use it ethically. You tell me. Maybe someone
Sure,
else wants to
yeah.
pop in
Anyone, anyone wants?
before I keep going.
Did
You
anyone want to
ready?
take that up? Oh, yeah, go for it, Anne. Yeah.
All right. Well, and again, I'll circle back to to Jesse's example of Linda McMahon then referring to AI as A1. We're expecting children to learn how to use it ethically when a lot of the adults are not using it ethically. It's not ethical to refer to it by a name that it's not, and to push it on children, right? So the adults are using it for propaganda. They're using it for revenge porn. There's journalists and lawyers and more professionals have been caught out, using it, and despite it hallucinating and inventing facts and citations and not checking their work. So teachers are supposed to teach kids how not to do what a lot of the adults are doing with it. And then, we know we're seeing more emerging research that's showing that use of generative AI actually makes adults lazier and makes them overconfident. So again, in a world in which the adults are not necessarily using this product ethically, and again, I'm going to set aside, which is a big set aside, all the environmental issues and the resource consumption issues, which should make us question whether there is a way to teach anyone how to use it ethically. These are problems that are inherent to the product and not inherent to children. And so that's really where I come down on the teaching of ethics around AI. I think we can teach ethics, and that's probably what we should be doing.
Great point. I want to, bring in, and I think actually you mentioned the study that someone also asked about in the questions, right? There's this, or at least one of the studies that it harms cognitive development that came out a few weeks ago, right? If anyone wants to talk about that. But I also wanted to bring in this question, because, and anyone really jump in on this, someone asked about, is there a place for AI in curriculum creation or grading? And, I think in some ways I've heard this before, that, you can be very sympathetic, right? Teachers are underpaid, they're overworked, and, they're asked to create often lessons and curriculum and have stacks of great, right? Like in Philadelphia, I remember once I moved to the academic magnet school that I was teaching at, I had 100% turn-in rate. And so every essay I assigned, I had like 200 kids turn it in, right? So there's an enormous amount of time that is spent grading and curriculum. And I had a former colleague actually at a different school. This was the most bizarre experience. It was right when we were putting this issue together. He said, "Oh, I've created a bot to put together a Rethinking Schools style mixer." And I didn't really even know how to respond, and you could put it through. And so I'm just, I'm really curious what you all think about this. Is there a place for AI in curriculum creation, in grading, to lessen teachers' load, or to teachers who feel like that it could? How would you respond to that?
Yeah, as a 20-year classroom teacher in elementary, middle, and high school, this is a really interesting question to me because, Adam, I'm with you in terms of the overwhelming nature of the profession. There's it's designed to burn you out, and it's designed to have more work than you can accomplish on your own. And so I do think the approach of trying to shame teachers for using AI is not effective. I don't blame teachers. There's plenty of that already happening in our society. I don't blame teachers who are trying to find ways to lessen their workload. Teachers are, as you said, underpaid, overworked, asked to do more with less every year. So if someone finds a tool that saves them time and makes their job more manageable, right, they're probably going to use it. That to me isn't the main problem here. And I think I want to, get us to think about moving away from an individual analysis to a structural analysis, right? So much of our society is about individualism. And we see the same thing with like the environmental issue, right? It's like the solution to the environment is you need to take shorter showers and you need to recycle better. And those kind of individual solutions are not solutions. They're not going to address the systemic problems of climate change, of a society based on disposable products that are destroying the environment, etc. Right? So I think we have to look at the real question, which is why are teachers in a position where they feel like they need to use these tools to get through the day? And we've created this system with overcrowded classrooms and not enough planning time and not enough support staff. And we have to, organize a struggle. Teachers are going to have to get active in their unions and fight back for the planning periods they deserve, for the smaller class sizes. These are the real solutions that would make our lives so much better. We're told that those are not realistic, that it's a lot easier to just take the AI and use it to help grade than get the class sizes down to where you could actually read and respond to all the papers, right? But many things we were told were unrealistic. It was unrealistic in this country to ever have a union in the first place, right? And then people organized it and fought for it. People worked 16, 18-hour days before the unrealistic movement that fought for the 8-hour day shut cities down and fought and won that. So we have to stop succumbing to what people say is inevitable or pragmatic or realistic right now and go for what we know is just, what is right, and what our students deserve.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that. Anyone else want to respond to?
Yeah,
Go ahead, Ann.
I guess I'd just like to follow up by saying I absolutely agree that shame is I mean, so much of what teachers do is unpaid extra work that's driven by guilt and shaming and being told that we're not working hard enough, even though we are overworked, and that putting it on individual teachers is not the way to go. I do think, though, it's worth teachers thinking about when the last time that something was taken off your plate as a task or a job or an effort at your school where something else wasn't immediately put back on, right? So I think, to the extent that we're already overworked, if administrators, boards of education, if the people who are helping to put budgets together are thinking that there's all of this miraculous time saving from AI, and there may be some time savings that some teachers are able to get from it. If there is an impression that teachers are saving a tremendous amount of time doing this, then it would be naive, I think, for us to think that districts won't decide teachers can take on more students even than we already do, put you on more committees, more duties, because again, they think AI tools are saving you time. And there have been a couple of recent studies, not in education, but in um, other fields of work. One where computer programmers were using generative AI to help them do some tasks, and they had estimated their time savings as something like 20%. They thought they had saved 20% more time. But the data actually showed that they had actually spent more time on it. But because they believed that the AI was going to help them save time, they thought it had. So I think the notion, and that's just those individuals. But then there was also, it was a recent Harvard Business School study that was very interesting that showed that workers who are adopting AI in some cases on their own to try to save themselves some time, so for, hopefully for their family life or for leisure or for anything else, were actually putting in more time working with AI tools than they had done previously. And so, and again, you've got then bosses who are thinking, oh, you're saving time, I can give you more projects, but you're also sometimes taking on more projects yourself because you think you're saving time. So I think those are worthwhile studies to share and questions to ask of teachers, even on an individual level, but absolutely, we should be working together. I think it's a big problem that one of the major teachers unions has taken money from these big tech companies to fund AI PD, and to present it as this wonderful opportunity. I think, we within, that's not my union. I'm an NEA teacher, but we have to fight within our unions to make sure they're fighting for our interests and for the interests of children, because we know it's not just teachers who suffer when class sizes grow and when teachers have too much work, it's children who suffer.
And I'll add to that I echo the call for treating this as a systemic issue. It's really, all of this is a symptom of capitalism failing children over and over again. And it's a testament to a system that doesn't honor children. It doesn't center children and their development. And it's why we have testing. It's why we have the datification of children's accomplishments in testing scores in schools in order to get funded. It's why the overload and the mistreatment, honestly, of educators across our country. And I worry that this system is forcing, and AI being a big part of that, right, is forcing educators to use these tools that can actually impact their own skills and their abilities to lesson plan and to think critically about what individual students need, and to really tune in with their expertise and hearts into what the schools need. And that is not their fault. It is this system. And the further that we get away from centering children and their development, and the closer we get toward AI, children are really going to suffer. Of course, like, thinking about all of this in a system of capitalism, right? Like, it's the companies and their marketing machine that has really done a great job of persuading us that this is the solution. And so I think, as both of you have said, standing up, stepping up, and understanding that there is a powerful entity at work here that is persuading us to think a certain way about AI in terms of how educators and administrators can use it.
Yeah, and I'll just briefly say that, admit that I'm not an expert on this and that I have a lot more to learn about AI, and I'm really interested in having this dialogue with more educators and and figuring out what kind of regulations make sense. Can we regulate it at all? Does it have to be done away with completely? Are there specific ways that it helps specific students, or is it always disrupting human interaction? There's more to discuss, but we have to slow this thing way down so we can have the discussion, even instead of just flooding our schools with AI and thinking that it's not going to have a detrimental impact. And so I want to learn from teachers on this call and be in dialogue and debate about the way forward. And learn more myself if there's any use at all ever or not. I'm still admittedly reading and researching and learning alongside other educators, but I know that we have to slow it down.
Yeah, yeah. I remember, I can't remember the exact place it was from, but there was some study that said the more people know about AI, the less supportive they are of it, right? And so there's clearly, this incentive, as Rachel talked about, for these companies to not slow it down, right? To push it as quick as we can. There's a thread in some of the questions I want to pull out because I think there's this kind of thread about, well, what should we be doing, right? Like what are in this world where students have access to AI, right? So what one person asked, what do you think are best teaching practices for, having students do their own critical thinking writing in an age where they can go home and get ChatGPT to do it for them? Or is there an alternative other than going back to pencil and paper for what students can produce in class? There was another question about, let's see, yes, they said Anne hinted at slowing down. For me, AI is about being quick with the answer. How do we get kids to slow down, to wrestle with finding meaning as opposed to getting a quick solution? Yeah, I'm just curious if folks have any thoughts on that. What are practices in this age where students do have access to these things?
Oh,
You want to go ahead?
sure. I'll say that I think that question is related to the other question in terms of shouldn't we be preparing students for this AI economy? And I don't believe that's the purpose of education. I think the purpose of education is to help us build a better world, to identify problems in our community, in our society, and help find collective solutions to those problems. And one of the largest problems facing us is climate change, and humanity will end. Civilization will cease to exist unless we find collective solutions to climate change. And as was pointed out, AI is another driver of climate change. So I want students to engage with AI in terms of understanding how it is destroying the planet and to debate whether it can be used ethically at all, right? And I think we have to use the kind of lessons that we see at Rethinking Schools and Zen Education Project to engage kids in real critical thinking, not just mimicry that is spit out by chatbots, right? And the kind of lessons I'm talking about, ask students to engage in historical debates, like the lesson around the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Adam, did you write that one or did Bill write it? Where the students?
I did.
Yeah, right. So the students take up the real debates that SNCC debated during the 1960s, right? Should we focus on voter registration or should we focus on direct action, right? And so they had a real problem in their community: segregation, Jim Crow, systemic racism. And they identified that problem and they found collective solutions to it. And then in our classrooms, the students read the real debates that SNCC was debating and figure out what position they want to take on it. And they have to debate that in class, right? That can't be done by a chatbot. That requires critical thinking to analyze the debates that happened in the past and figure out how to find those collective solutions. And that kind of pedagogy frightens those in power. That's why they want to replace it. That's why they're banning teaching about race and gender and sexuality, because there's so many lessons in the Black freedom movement about how to create a more equitable society that would wrestle wealth away from the richest 1%. So they would rather replace that kind of dialogic, problem-posing pedagogy with memorization and, interacting with chatbots. And we have to have a much bigger vision of the purpose of education.
I love that. Obviously, too, it seems like maybe one of the questions students should be asking, particularly in these communities where they're plopping these data centers, right, is what impact is that going to have? We should be having those sort of debates and discussions in classrooms, right? I want to, in the last couple of minutes, turn us to kind of the what do we do about it? And go first just to Rachel, if you could tell us, Fair Play has been an advocacy organization around doing a number of projects around AI. So if you could tell us a little bit more about what Fair Play has been doing and how folks might plug into that.
Well, thank you so much for asking about our work. As a nonprofit, we really fight to ensure that children aren't being taken advantage of by corporations. And we've been doing it for about 25 years in one form or another. And obviously, AI has taken over a lot of those efforts. So, we're looking at AI companies and other companies that use AI to make a profit at the expense of children's well-being. And so we're working to figure out how to slow down AI. Some of that is kind of generally fighting for more federal legislation around how companies, including AI, design their products and ensuring that they have a duty of care to children as they are thinking about how their systems will operate, what data they'll collect, if they are manipulating their users into clicking, spending time, spending money. The US is pretty far behind in terms of that type of regulation. It's called design code legislation. And we hope that kind of legislation could also apply to AI companies. But it's a bipartisan issue supported by kind of both sides of the aisle, which is really exciting. And passing laws takes a really long time. Our government is what it is. And so, we have over the past several months launched a number of campaigns to really shine a light on some of these issues and how kids are being affected. One that I mentioned earlier was that we're looking at AI slop on platforms like YouTube. And so just last week, we actually organized 235 experts and organizations from around the world to sign on to a letter that we wrote to YouTube and its parent company, Google, demanding some changes around how AI content is treated on their platform in relation to kids, including stopping algorithmic recommendations for YouTube videos to young children. And with that, we have also organized a petition, which is available to the public to add pressure to this call for change for YouTube and other similar types of platforms. We also put out a world's first advisory around AI toys, hoping to educate the public about all of the potential harms of AI in toy form. And it was, what we really wanted to highlight was that AI technology is not ready for children. And that, again, like there's this big experiment happening, and children are very much the victims. And then sort of to address a lot of the chatbot issues, we have partnered with a couple of other organizations to create what's called the People First Model Chatbot Bill. It's been introduced in, I think, around 7 states now, but this is a model bill that would require companies to put safeguards in place around chatbots and how they interact with young users, and it would include toys as well. And then lastly, we also run what's called the Screen Time Action Network at Fair Play, and we have a vibrant community of folks that are concerned about issues like AI and other types of technology and how it impacts childhood. And we have this great work group called our Screens in Schools work group that has been really grappling with a lot of AI and how we can kind of come together to take action to slow it down. So I think Danielle is posting some links in the chat, but that's a great kind of gathering place for working in community with others on this issue. And I think in the next few weeks or so, we're going to have something come out where we'll need all hands on deck. So stay tuned for that as well.
Awesome. Thank you. I want to just close by going back to Anne and then Jesse, and we'll try and be brief here because we're reaching our time. But just, if you could speak to, there's a number of questions in the chat about what do we do? As we mentioned, the union is pushing AI, right? A lot of school boards are pushing it, right? So if you have any thoughts on what should teachers be doing, knowing this? And why don't you go first, and then we'll go to Jesse.
Well, I do think it's somewhat discipline and age group driven in terms of what teachers can do in terms of working together, I think. So the question of what can we do in our own classrooms and in our schools to try to, for example, as you were mentioning earlier, battle the fact that kids have all this access at home, and how do we make sure that we're actually teaching in ways that have integrity, so that we're building the skills we want kids to have. I think teachers working collaboratively, to propose a PD within their own districts that is around, maybe it is a return to pen and paper. Maybe it is an experiment of going screen-free for a month. Maybe it is whatever it is that you're trying to do to manage that issue, sharing those, going to conferences, sharing those ideas, because there is this flood of PD around using AI. And I mean, I taught from 2000, my last teaching year was 2023 to 2024. How many tech tools were shown to me in a meeting, right? As here's this great tool, see how you can use it, right? And so I think proposing alternate and working on with whether other teachers on alternate ways that we're all figuring out, because we are so often trying to figure these things out individually and finding ways to share them, and have that kind of shadow PD that's working against this flood of AI PD, it feels a little bit, well, it's aspirational. It feels like it's something that's hard to do, but it is something that you can do in smaller groups or within your communities or across communities, as one method. And events like this are part of that.
Yeah. There are a growing number of educators and students and parents who are not passively accepting this AI driven future. Groups like Encode Justice, that's led by youth, are at the forefront of the struggle to regulate AI. There's a group called Algorithmic Justice League challenging the spread of biometric surveillance in schools. And, they're warning us that facial recognition systems are threatening student safety and school climate. And so we got to support these organizations and fight for regulation. We absolutely need it. There's a school in Vancouver, Washington, where there was a data breach that exposed how much personal information is being collected, right? The mental health records, LGBTQ plus identities were quietly harvested by these companies, and then in this data breach released to everyone, for everyone to know. And so we have to put guardrails on how these tools are used. One study showed that 60% of US students who are using these AI systems that monitor them are censoring themselves when they're being monitored. And that is really harmful for education. And I think that the clearest argument for why these AI tools should not be used with our kids is being made actually by the wealthiest people in our country, by where they send their kids to schools, right? Because the wealthy want small class sizes for their kids. They want rich libraries and arts programs and debate programs. They want human mentors, right? That work one-on-one with their kids. But then they say for our kids, AI chatbots in overcrowded classrooms is enough. I reject that logic. It's a familiar pattern where they push standardization, scripted learning for the many, creative and creativity and care for the few, right? And so we have to not only fight to regulate AI, but we have to fight against a capitalist system that has a logic of profit before children, that has a logic of the resources being funneled to the children of the rich and depriving the rest. And I think only collective struggle will get us out of this problem.
Yes, thank you all. Thank you for joining us. Thanks to our panelists, ASL interpreters. This has been such an incredible conversation. I just want to let folks know that they can stay involved with Rethinking Schools by subscribing to our magazine, adding our books to your library. We've got a new book, Science Teaching for Social Justice, that's coming out at the end of this month. You can pre-order it now, and attending our upcoming events that are listed on our website. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and I hope to see you at our next event. Bye, all.